So I used to teach statistics a long time ago. And teaching statistics is easy. So students are afraid of statistics, and students know they don't know statistics. So I get to be a teacher who teaches them something they don't know, and they acknowledge they don't know it. When it comes to international business in general, and immigration is one of the topics within this international business domain, it's extremely difficult to teach, especially in the United States, because it's such an emotionally and politically charged topic. And most people, foolishly, completely wrong, but still believe that they know everything there is to know about immigration. Of course, I know it. I mean, it's on the news. And so I can tell you what to do about immigration. And so you all of a sudden become not a scholar who studies the topic, but you become sometimes, in their eyes, a political enemy. They would doubt your arguments because that's not what my favorite political candidate said about the topic, for example. And so I will try to be as careful as possible not to offend anyone, but at the same time, I call you to be a little bit more open-minded today than maybe you normally are, because as I said, there is a lot about this topic that most people don't know. So some people believe that immigration is bad because immigrants come and take our jobs, right? So, and eat our bread, so consume the services. So that's those who are against immigration. And then the other view is, well, immigration is excellent. Immigrants basically are productive members of the society who come and start working on day one. So you need productive members of the society, people. Well, immigrants join, usually they're relatively young, often skilled, and so they can start producing something right away. The truth is that the issue is much, much, much more complicated than these two polarizing views. And so my goal today is to get into some intricacies that perhaps are not obvious to most people, or maybe things that people often do not think about. So usually these sort of black and white extreme views are oversimplification, and it's never so simple when it comes to such complex issues. But before I talk about the economic effects, let me give you a little bit of a history, and I apologize in advance that my presentation will be very much US-centric. So when it comes to the United States, we've had multiple waves of immigration here over the years. So we had 200 years ago, there were waves of immigration from Ireland. Then also a little bit later, we had more immigrants from Italy, Eastern Europeans, and then Chinese. Then obviously we had refugees of World War I and World War II. There were also many Jews as a new ethnic group at that time. And so with each of these groups of people, the locals at that time, whomever they were, I guess mostly were of British descent at some point, and then some other European descents. So they were not particularly welcoming of immigrants. So here you see cartoons from those periods. So like this one, for example, here shows the Irish immigrant who presumably is not mixing in the American melting pot. So there were immigrants who all become sort of American, but the Irish at that time were perceived as too weird, too whatever negative adjective you want to use. But they were at that time perceived as not a very sort of good addition to the American melting pot. And then also around that same time, we had, so again, a cartoon here depicts a German and an Irish immigrant, so who presumably at that time just, all just drink, brawl, and basically do bad things. So they were perceived as not particularly good immigrants. I mean, obviously looking at the Irish or Germans in the United States today, it's kind of funny to think that some 100+ years ago, the locals at that time thought that these are bad immigrants, but that was the case. And here's another cartoon also from 150 years ago that shows presumably like a real American family starving without a job, while all those pesky immigrants come off the boat and take the jobs. And these greedy entrepreneurs or business owners hire immigrants and not hire locals. So the sentiment that many of you see on the news now in the United States, but it's a similar sentiment in Europe and I assume in many other parts of the world. So, well, at least for the United States, it's nothing new. So it's been like that all the time. It just, we have different immigrant groups, but the idea is more or less the same every time. So now most of the sentiment, anti-immigration sentiment revolves around Latinos, but just change the name of the immigrant group. The messaging is essentially the same. And so I'd like to ask you a question here. So let me see if I can go to my poll here. And so I'd like to ask you to answer this question. Again, I'm interested in both American and non-American votes so that I can compare sort of how well one group knows versus the other. So this is the question that I ask of my students. So let me see if I can start the poll. Yukta, can you maybe help me here and go to polls and start the first question?
I just need the host access.
Yeah. So I'll give you that, but yeah, I can launch it. Yeah. So the poll has started. So my question is, in your opinion, so do you know what percent of people who reside in the United States are foreign born? So I've asked this question many times of my students in the United States, and so I know what answers my students give to this question. So, but I'm curious to know if you know. So let me just make sure that you are a co-host and you also have access to the polls. So
also, those not able to vote, they have sent answers on the chat box as well. We have E, C, D, most of them as E, I'd say.
So, well, importantly, yes, I see. I'll reveal the results in a second, but these are the answers that I see all the time. Okay, very good. So let me show you what most people believe. I'll end the poll and share results. So, Yukta, am I showing the results? Does everyone can see them?
No, we need to proceed, like take one slide ahead so that we can see.
No, I think on the phone it should be revealing the results as is, but basically about half of you believe that it's 40+%, and then it's sort of progressively fewer. So 5% believe that it's 10, 5% believe that it's 15, and then most people believe that it's 40 or more. And then many also believe that it's about 30%. Okay, very good, very good. Let me ask you another question. So this question is, if you had the magic wand and you wished the best to the United States, like you wanted the United States to be as successful as possible, what would be the optimal level of foreign-born population in the United States? So what would be the best percentage of foreign-born population in the United States? Which one would be most beneficial for the United States? So let me see if I can start that poll. Yes, launch. Just a second, immigration.
It's shared already.
No, I'm not sure, and I'm going to the next question. How do you go to the next question? Why is it not? Oh, come on. Boom. Hello. Sorry. Yeah, that's here is the second one. Oh, everybody voted on everything already?
Yes, they did.
Oh, okay. So I've somehow shared everything. Okay, well, very well. We already have the results for the second one. So the second one shows, yeah. So the second question, it looks like most of you believe that it would be beneficial to be at about 40+, but equally the same number says 20% would be fine and 30% would be fine. Well, very well. So let me show you what is the actual number. And it's kind of interesting. So when I ask this question in the United States, most of my students believe that the foreign-born population in the United States is 40+%, and they believe this is too much. They think like 30% would have been enough. Yukta, by the way, do you know the answer to this question? What percentage of people residing in the United States were born outside of the United States? Do you know that answer?
So I am not sure, but I'd like to give it a guess. I believe it's 30%.
30 live overseas. And do you think it's too much for the United States? Would the United States be better off or worse off with more or fewer people? What would you recommend? Like I don't know.
It should be better.
Biden calls you and asks for the optimal number, and you as a business major need to provide an answer. What would you recommend?
It's the most culturally diverse place. So if it can limit like 30% people out there, so I think that is something that's good for the US to have the immigrants.
All right. Well, so let me ask you this before I show you the answers. What part of the world do you think has the most immigrants? And again, so we have those answers here. So most of you believe that the United States and Canada have the most immigrants. Some believe that it's Mexico, and then 10% believe that it's Qatar, United Arab Emirates, and so on. You guys are bad. So you don't know the answers, and that's interesting because that's exactly what's going on with my students as well. Am I showing the statistics, Yukta?
Yes, you are.
So, well, first, the Holy See. So the Vatican technically has 100% immigrant population. So all of the people there are immigrants, and they actually are citizens only for the time when they work for Vatican. But no, the United Arab Emirates has 87%, 88 almost foreign-born population. Like literally 1 out of 10 people in the United Arab Emirates were not born in the United Arab Emirates. Qatar, Kuwait are very close. The United States is not even close, and it's at 15%, if I remember correctly. Yes. So 15.4. And so what's interesting, so when I talk to my students, and this is extremely, extremely important, many of them say, oh, immigrants, too many immigrants, we need to reduce the number. And I say, well, if you had the magic wand and could wave it and you could change that number, what would it be? And they say like, yeah, like 30% would be better. Well, if you had the magic wand, you would double the immigrant population. So it's interesting that sometimes people, not sometimes, most of the people have no clue what the actual state of the affairs is. And yet they are eager to wave the magic wand. And if you think there are too many immigrants in the United States, well, most of my students, and it looks like most of the students here, would have actually doubled what really is. And so that's, again, sometimes is mind-boggling because, again, unlike statistics where people admit they don't know, here they think they do. And then if they did have a magic wand, they would have actually made things worse in their own opinion. So now, where most of the immigrants are, well, is it good for the country? Well, let's do the most primitive test first. And obviously, the causality here is completely messed up. But let's see. So those of you who believe that immigration is good, or those of you who believe that immigration is bad, well, let's see which parts have more immigrants and then analyze how they are doing. And so, as we just showed, lots of immigrants in the Middle East, lots of immigrants in Europe, and lots of immigrants in North America plus Australia. Well, these happen to be the places that are actually doing pretty well economically. So the European Union, North America, the rich Arab countries, that's where most of the immigrants are, and they do well. You guys smart. I mean, obviously you will catch the causal fallacy here. So you can say, well, maybe these countries are doing so well not because of the immigration, but because they're doing so well, and that's why immigrants are going there. And that could be true. So at the same time, what we know is that immigrants have been going there for many years, in fact, for centuries in some of these places, and they still seem to be doing well or better than the rest of the world. So at the very least, we can say, well, we don't know if they would have done even better without the immigrants. But we know that, for example, the percentage of foreign-born population in the United States has been around 15% for centuries now. And same thing in Canada, it's around Canada and Australia, it's around 22%, 23%. And so it's been relatively stable as a percent of the total population. And so far they're doing fine. So we can tell that that number may not be making things better, but evidently doesn't lead to a catastrophe either. So as a very crude test of effects of immigration. But again, that's extremely primitive. So let's talk about it in more sophisticated terms. And so I'll start with, well, how are immigrants different from locals? I guess it depends on where they come from, where they go, why they immigrate. Are they refugees or are they skilled laborers? Are they something else? What kind of status they are in? Are they legal, illegal, visa worker, student, permanent resident? I guess that matters. How much time they've spent. I mean, I guess once they land, they're different from for 10 years in the country. Personal characteristics such as skills, qualifications, experiences. So all of that would obviously determine how they are different. But holding everything else constant, we can say these things. Well, one, immigrants probably are less connected than locals. So they have fewer connections, fewer acquaintances in this country. They know fewer people. They don't have relatives. They may not have friends initially, at least. So they probably have limited language skills. So again, some come and, fluent enough, but most of the time immigration is from one country to another with a different language group. And so at least for a while, you would be not as fluent in the local language as the locals, obviously. In some cases, you would not have as many local credentials. So you may have some diplomas, certificates, whatever else in your home country, but those often may not be recognized in the host country. And so you may be sort of less credentialed than the locals. And then often you may have some restrictions on employment, including on your family members. So you may not be allowed to work in some areas while on a visa. Your work visa may be employer specific. There may be other kinds of restrictions on what you can do. And then also that applies to your spouses, family members. So maybe you have the work visa to work, but in some countries, your wife or your husband or your kids may not be allowed to work at the same time. So I guess holding out everything else constant, immigrants would have fewer opportunities or know about fewer opportunities, may be willing to work for less because of that, because of those fewer opportunities, but also because of that, probably more likely to start their own business. And we'll talk about the statistics on that soon. But if you have fewer employment opportunities, you're more likely just to try to create your own job. So that's sort of a known factor. So now, are immigrants more likely to be jobless? So one of the sort of concerns about immigration is that immigrants don't work, they're jobless, while the locals sort of work hard to feed the immigrants. Well, not necessarily. It may depend on the situation in the country. It may depend on the country. So, for example, when you look at the statistics, the latest I could find for the United States, in the United States, actually, immigrants were less likely to be unemployed than locals. So in the United States, immigrants are more likely to be employed, to have a job than locals. There are quite a few other countries where the difference is minimal. In some countries, like in Chile, immigrants are actually twice as likely to be employed. But then some European countries, and especially at the time of the survey, Greece was going through some economic problems. And at that time in Greece, for example, or Spain for that matter, immigrants were more likely to be jobless than the locals. So no definitive universal answer for the entire planet. So, but at least in the United States, statistics show that immigrants tend to work more than locals just as far as the employment status. Now, this one's very interesting, extremely important. So at least in the United States, and again, I'm not sure if the rhetoric is the same in other countries, but one of the concerns is that immigrants do not pay taxes. And so let's discuss that. Yukta, you're a business major, right? So let me ask you this. What kind of taxes are there? Like what are the types of taxes? Like, for example, there is a sales tax. We know that. So what are other types of taxes? And students, if you can put in the comments, I'm curious if you know. So what are the taxes, like types of taxes that you know? Yes.
So we have corporate tax, sales tax,
So
property
corporate,
tax.
yeah, corporate income tax. Very good. What else?
We have sales taxes,
Sales tax, very good.
taxes.
Yeah, somebody said income tax. Somebody said also value added tax. Very good. What else? Property taxes. Somebody said what else?
Yeah, estate taxes, property taxes, one and the same thing.
Well, state, that's the level at which they're charged, but okay. Okay, not bad at all. Well, let's take a look at those taxes and let's think about which of those immigrants can pay and cannot pay. So we have income, property, vehicle registration, plus there are also some indirect contributions, right? So corporate income tax, technically people don't pay, it's corporations pay, but immigrants maybe, or anyone else by working for the corporation, you sort of maybe contributed to that. Well, let's think about it for a second. So which of those taxes can immigrants not pay? So for example, sales tax, right? So can you avoid paying the sales tax? No, you go to the store, nobody asks for your passport, you buy, or value added tax in Europe. So nobody can escape that tax. So nobody cares about your immigrant status, you pay that. How about property tax? Can you own a house and not pay the tax? Again,
I don't think you have to pay.
Nobody cares if you're an immigrant or not. You may not even be in the country, but the property tax is assessed on the property, so you cannot escape that one. How about I don't know, people said inheritance tax. Again, can you avoid paying that one? Well, I guess inheritance would be registered in the United States, so you cannot avoid paying that either. So how about corporate tax? Well, that's something that is paid by corporations. So I guess in this case, just go to the presentation mode. So that one, that one you cannot avoid. Now, income tax, Potentially, but it's very difficult to avoid. So the only way, again, depends on the country, but in the United States, for example, my income tax is paid by the employers. So when you get your check, when you get your payment, that tax is withheld automatically if it's a salary or a wage. So legal or illegal, you cannot, like, you don't control that tax. But if you are paid cash, then yes, you can totally avoid paying the income tax. You just put the money in the pocket and never report it. In this case, though, I don't think your immigrant status determines if you paid or not. So it's more about your sort of ethics, because I assume there are some locals who may be paid in cash, and there is a very good chance some of them may not be paying either. But yes, that's at least where the opportunity exists not to pay the tax. Corporate income tax, as I said, it's not really something that you control either. So income tax, that's where immigrants may be able not to pay the tax. So again, depending on the income level, there may be even no income tax anyway. But in theory, if you're paid in cash, or if you're self-employed and you are paid formally, but you can still somehow not just simply pay that tax at the end of whatever tax period you are in. So that would be possible. So for sure. So, but when we look at the statistics and at the data, it actually looks like illegal immigrants are not avoiding paying most of the taxes, because, as I said, most of those you cannot avoid. Just simply because they're automatically embedded in the price of the product or in the paycheck when you get it. And so also very, very little of the actual income is pure cash. So there are in the United States some immigrants, I assume illegal, who sort of, day laborers who would be paid with, and so potentially that, that's where you don't see paid taxes. But first, that's a minuscule, tiny number of all immigrants in the country. And second, even those who work illegally, in most of the cases, they work for sort of legal companies, unless, like, I don't know, like you hire someone to mow your lawn. And so in those cases, they would still be paying the taxes. The employer would still be paying taxes before giving the money to people. So when you look at the numbers reported by the US IRS, the tax authority, they say that actually quite a lot of people, even those who are in the country illegally, still pay their taxes. So yes, and so there are some statistics on whether or not those contributions are more or less than they take from the system. And most of the studies show that actually they contribute to the taxes more than what they get back in the revenues. So it's important to look at, and I have a bunch of links here if you want to read it. So it's important to keep it in mind. So, and then here is another interesting article here that talks about how some immigrants have like fake social security numbers so that they can pay taxes, because the employer sort of, when they pay to the workers, so they need to report whom they paid. And so illegal immigrants sometimes would have social security numbers that are fake. And so the taxes would still be paid, even so, though sometimes, tied to fake names and fake accounts, but they're still paid to the IRS. And so I was very surprised when I found out that, because apparently, again, the actual percentage of not paid taxes is extremely low and much lower than many people think. So another interesting claim is that, another claim is that, well, but they still reap the benefits. So like, for example, even illegal immigrants in the United States, their kids go to school, and schools cost something. And obviously, if you are here illegally and not paying income taxes, I guess you still pay other taxes, but not paying income taxes, technically you reap the benefits. Well, importantly, again, in the United States, the schools are usually paid from the local taxes, and mostly from local sales taxes and local property taxes. So in the United States, schools are primarily paid, or school budgets are mostly at the level of counties, and mostly come from property and from sales taxes, local sales tax. And so again, those are two taxes that you cannot really avoid paying. And so in a way, for schooling, at least, you cannot really avoid paying, even if you're a tourist, don't send the kids to school. So as long as you're in the city, buying something, you're paying the sales tax. And by doing so, you contribute also to schools. But I imagine that in some jurisdictions, this could be covered from income tax. And so if immigrants don't pay income tax, or if some of them do not pay income tax if they can avoid it by, like, let's say, by virtue of being paid through cash. So then I suppose, yes, that would be a benefit that you sort of receive without paying for it. Social and welfare benefits, again, tricky business. I don't know about Europe, but in the United States, there are very few benefits for illegal immigrants. At least from my knowledge, it's extremely difficult to get some of those. But in theory, there may be some programs that also cover illegal immigrants. And in that case, yes. So the benefits would be reaped and contributions would not be made. Services such as road safety, public services, again, they're provided to both legal and illegal immigrants, those who pay taxes and those who don't. And if some people don't, they technically enjoy the services without paying for them. Again, tricky business because much of like things like road safety, police, public services are paid from the local taxes that mostly come from property tax, sales tax, things like that. So, but in theory, that's possible. Healthcare, tricky. Again, depends on different countries, and I'll talk specifically about the United States. But in the United States, healthcare is not free. And so the rules usually require the hospitals, for example, emergencies, to provide enough medical care so that the person sort of stays alive, but nobody's going to do an expensive surgery for you for free. So if you come to the emergency room with like a gunshot wound or some injury, a broken arm, technically they cannot send you back home without providing treatment. And in theory, you can then not pay. They will try to catch you and, collect the money. But in theory, if you're illegal, if you don't have the documents, they don't know who you are, so they cannot send you away without providing treatment. And if so, you may be able to get some of the treatment for free. However, what's interesting is that when you look at the statistics on unpaid healthcare bills, it's a very, very small percentage of the total GDP, and it's a very small percentage of the total operating cost of hospitals. So, for example, unpaid emergency care bills in the United States, depending on the hospital, is somewhere between 0.5% and 2% total. And that's total. That's not from illegal immigrants or legal immigrants. That's from everyone in the country, So I can imagine that if illegal immigrants account for, all immigrants account for about 15%, and illegal probably for 1%, 2%, 3%. So this percentage obviously would be then that much share of the total. And so while I, as a tax-paying citizen, am upset that somebody abuses the system, and I'm not happy even if only $1 is stolen from you. So why should I pay and somebody else not? But at the same time, I should understand that, again, if I had a magic wand and I could eliminate all of the unpaid emergency care bills, it wouldn't change anything. I mean, at most, it will add 1% to 2% to the hospital budget, and I don't think that will make a huge difference. And as I said, the portion of that attributed to immigrants who don't pay the taxes, that's like, again, another 1/100th of that 1%. So clearly, it's not the cause of the high healthcare cost, and it's definitely not a solution. So if I could completely eliminate this outstanding debt, it wouldn't make a difference. Like nobody would even notice the numbers are so small. One thing that many people do not understand, and this is perhaps the most important message that I have, one thing that people do not understand when we talk about immigration is that we talk about, or many people talk about, how immigrants sort of take jobs, but not talk about how immigrants create jobs. And the truth is that immigrants are not only workers, so not only employees, but they are also consumers. So immigrants also have to eat. Immigrants also need food, clothes, cars, houses, entertainment, whatever else. And so when an immigrant comes into the country, on the one hand, an immigrant probably will be looking for a job and presumably will take a job. But at the same time, somebody needs to feed this immigrant, dress this immigrant, repair the immigrant's car, build a house where immigrant lives, I don't know, run a movie at a movie theater if an immigrant wants to watch it. And all of that obviously creates the job. So when we wanted to know the economic effect of immigration, so we need to look at both sides. So sort of jobs taken versus jobs creating, supply of labor versus demand of labor, right? Effects of that supply and demand on prices, both wages, but also prices of products and jobs created. So in the perfectly balanced world, one immigrant creates one job, so to speak. Takes one job, so works in one job, but then uses the money he or she earns on, I don't know, clothing, I don't know, haircut, transportation, and that creates demand equivalent to how much the immigrant made, which presumably then creates an equivalent number of jobs. But what's on balance, that's where the discussion is. Most of the time, I'm willing to bet that it's about 1-to-1. So just like everybody else, people consume, people produce. And so one job taken, one job created. But again, it could be slightly more, slightly less, but that's what needs to go into the analysis. Now, one important discussion that is often missing in the United States is what kind of immigrants we want. So there is more discussion about whether or not we want immigrants as opposed to what kind of immigrants we want. And the truth is that some immigrants are good and perhaps some immigrants are bad. Like, for example, I wouldn't want an immigrant who is a criminal, who is older, who doesn't want to work or cannot work anymore. So that kind of immigrant, legal in the country, would be qualified for some services and at the same time would not be providing anything back to the society, right? At the same time, I would say I want more, for example, students. So international students are great immigrants. So they pay tuition, they pay for housing, they pay for food, yet international students are not allowed to work, at least not off campus. And in a way, they only create demand for whatever jobs exist around university, demand for jobs around food, catering, all that kind of stuff. And so they would be creating jobs, but they are not allowed to take jobs. So if you are interested in economic effects, then yes, a criminal who is too sick, too old to work is, I would say, a bad immigrant. And let's say an international student is a good immigrant because, they create more jobs. But let's talk about it in more sophisticated terms. So adaptability. I really like the Canadian system. So I am a citizen of Canada and I am a citizen of the United States. And it's interesting that in Canada, they have this point system that the United States doesn't have. So in Canada, when you apply for immigration, you complete like a test or a form. And so they give you points for things that have been shown to help immigrants sort of adapt and adjust to the new society. So you get points for things like language fluency in Canada, English, French. For your age, the younger you are, the more points you get. So the logic is younger people are healthier, have more years to work. So you get more points if you are young and fewer if you're old. You get points for work experience, you get points for education. They give you additional points if you have education in an English language country and in Canada itself, and things like that. And so they give you points for things that have been shown to correlate with being a productive member of society, someone who can adapt, find a job, and have a nice be a good citizen, so to speak. And the other way around. So if you don't have enough points, then it will be harder for you to immigrate. And so, so the system, at least in my time, was such that if you get enough points, you are in, and the more points you have, the faster your application will be processed. And the other way around, if you don't have enough points, then maybe you are not the best immigrant and you will be just out. In the United States, the system is a little bit more geared towards like family ties and things like that. There are some other programs, but most of the time it's not so much about adaptability, it's about already having relatives in the country. And so that's not the optimal model in my opinion. Substitution, on the other hand, is bad. So you don't want immigrants who are substitutes for your local workers. So if you already have too many workers in a specific industry, you probably don't want immigrants with that specific skill set because they will be substituting the locals. So you want something that is new, something that is in short supply in your country. Like, for example, again, when I was applying for my Canadian citizenship at that time, I remember you get extra points if you were a nurse, like a medical worker and factory worker. At that time, they had a shortage of these two professions. And so they would give you extra points for that profession. and then they would give you fewer points for some other professions which they had too many of, so to speak. So they didn't want substitution because, again, if you know economics, so substitution reduces prices. And so if you already have too many workers in whatever industry, if you bring more people with that same skill set, I guess some of those will lose jobs and maybe their wages will go down. So you don't want that. You want immigrants who bring new directions. Again, so some immigrants they simply create new directions. Like, this guy, right? Bruce Lee. Well, technically, he's not an immigrant because he was born in the United States, but he grew up in Hong Kong and came to the United States as an adult, essentially. But so he created this whole new genre of movies, and he had his own martial arts schools. So that was a new thing in the United States. So he didn't take anybody's jobs. I mean, that stuff just didn't exist in the United States. So he brought a whole new thing. Like, same thing, who this guy is, right? So that's Albert Einstein.
Albert Einstein.
So he came to the United States as a scientist, relativity theory, physics. Again, it's not like there were 10 Einsteins in the United States already. And so when this Einstein came, one of those 10 lost a job because this one took the same job for less. No, the guy created something completely new. He brought unique knowledge. And so that was something that essentially, the kind of activity and work that did not exist before, right? And so when you look at the statistics, so in the United States, again, I'm not sure about all of the countries, but in the United States, about almost half of all Fortune 500 companies actually were founded by immigrants or their children. So same thing when you look at the Silicon Valley firms. So most of those, in fact, quite a few, more than half, have foreigners among their founders. And so here we can be talking about something new because, again, these companies didn't exist. So it's not like an immigrant came and took my job or somebody else's job. The immigrant came and created something completely new, a new company that did not exist. So in this case, I suppose it's fine. Like Elon Musk, in fact, one of those guys whom everybody knows. So Elon Musk is from South Africa. So he first came to Canada through his mother. He had a connection to Canada. I believe his mother was a Canadian citizen. But then he moved from Canada to the United States. And so he created a bunch of companies. I mean, Tesla, SpaceX, those are all literally new industries. Like he essentially built, or he is not, did not start, but he definitely developed the electric vehicle industry. And so before him, like he didn't take a job of somebody at Ford. So he created a whole new company and hired people. So from that perspective, I suppose that's perfectly fine. Right. And as I said, if we want to take extreme examples, so what kind of immigrants, on the one hand, provide no supply of labor, but take jobs, but create demand for products, I would say, like, for example, students are an interesting case. So they create a lot of demand for products, but at the same time, most of the time, they're not allowed to work, at least not off campus. And so that would be sort of an example where more jobs are created than taken, right? So, and then the other example could be like immigrants who offer labor but create no demand. I don't know, it would be hard to think about something like that. But I suppose if somebody like a refugee comes to the country, works 24/7, but doesn't eat, doesn't have shelter, and sends all the money back home, in theory, that would be taking jobs but not creating demand. But how realistic that is, I don't know. But, let's say the person makes $3,000 a month and sends 2,000 back home and lives on 1,000. I guess, yes, in this case, it would be more jobs taken than created through demand for products. The truth is most people are somewhere in between. Like most people, they have a job, they create demand for products. And so probably most of the time they kind of take one job, create one job. So more or less. Can immigration increase wages or reduce wages? Well, if it's a substitution, as we talked, yes, it potentially can reduce wages. So if you have a lot of, let's say, for example, I don't know, farm workers, and most of the immigrants who come also want to work at farms, I suppose that increased supply of labor reduces wages. But then at the same time, immigration can increase wages. And so it can do so through entrepreneurial immigrants. Yukta, do you know who this guy here is on the top picture?
It's Google's founder.
Google's founder, Sergey Brin, right? So this guy created a business. Well, actually, Elon Musk created businesses. Arnold Schwarzenegger, again, you know him as an actor, or maybe as the governor of California. But did you know that he was a millionaire by the age of 28? So he actually had a very successful business, construction. So he was building houses. So when he came to the United States, he was in school for a while. He was a bodybuilder. He was doing all kinds of things. But very early on, like at the age of 23, I believe he started his construction company. So they were first repairing houses with friends, but then they had a larger, viable business with many employees. And so he actually was a millionaire by the age of 28. And so all of these people, they created companies, they hired people. So in a way, they created demand for labor, and more demand means higher price, simple economics 101. So likewise, not only just simply creating existing or creating businesses that are just businesses, in many cases, they create know-how. Again, we may love or not love Elon Musk. I particularly used to be a fan, not a fan at all now, but you cannot deny that the guy is creating a lot of know-how. So his electric vehicles, his rockets, so much of that has new technology. Again, he did not invent an electric vehicle, or not the first one to build a rocket, but his rockets, his cars do have a lot of novelty. And in a way, again, that creates new technologies, improves productivity, creates demand for labor. And so all of that allows to increase wages through productivity or increased demand. And then simply inspiration. Again, I put here Barney. I actually am a big fan of his, read all his books. But yeah, I know he inspires many people to work harder, to produce more. And I suppose through that increased productivity and motivation, some people may make more money as well. In the United States, especially, much of the immigration debate is about illegal immigration. But the truth is, there is this whole body of other immigrants, skilled immigrants. In fact, I'm one of them. So when I came to the United States, I had the O1 visa. So not even H1B. H1B, that's the professional sort of visa. I had O1, what they call the genius visa. So they give out only a very, very few of those in a year. And so basically, the qualifications say that you need to be have a major prize like the Nobel Prize or other equivalent achievements. And so I think they have like 10 or so points, and you need to have like 7 to qualify. And so that includes like your publishing books and articles in your field in top outlets, like top journals. You're frequently invited to be the judge of work of others. You have the highest possible degree in your field, usually a doctorate, but it could be dependent, like if you're a lawyer or something, it could be something else. And so, but also H1B. So this is a visa that is given to professionals. It does require at least university education, and usually you need to be basically better than what the company can find locally. The thing is that number quota for those visas has been set decades ago, and it's capped at 140,000 a year. And so what's interesting here is that, so it opens, I believe, on April 1 every year. And so many companies want to have these professional employees that all of the visas are given out like on day one. Usually it's like 2-3 days, but often one day. So the companies say, we need this person that's a professional we cannot find locally. They apply in advance. They wait until that new cycle to start April 1. And then like you would have like 1 million applications, but only 140,000 positions available. And so there is this constant debate going on that, now this number, this cap is outdated. We need more people, because what happens in many cases, if the companies cannot hire those skilled know-how type of workers, professionals, if they cannot bring them into the United States, they just open an office somewhere in Mumbai or in Berlin and hire foreigners there. And so who wins? But yeah, so that's an interesting sort of problem that is often not discussed. And so while some politicians petition against immigration in the context of illegal immigration, nobody talks about, well, but we need brains. And the only way the brains can get into the United States is on H1B. But there are only so many of those H1Bs are given out every year, and it's just simply not enough, right? So how does the United States compare to the rest of the world in the war on talent? It's not doing particularly well. So countries like Canada, like Australia, like the United Kingdom, so they have these point systems. It's much easier in those countries to immigrate to. And in many cases, people just choose to go there. Like, for example, when I was in Canada, when we came I was an international student and my wife was with me. So in Canada, she was allowed to work. But then when I was an international student before that in the United States, in Texas, so my spouse was not allowed to work. And so many people, when they choose where to go, they think, well, do I want to have 2 jobs in the family in Canada or Australia, or just one in the United States? So obviously there are many advantages to those other countries. The US still remains a magnet for immigrants, no doubt. But when it comes specifically for war for talent, it's tricky. So finally, is it okay or not okay when immigrants are willing to work for less? So let me give you a few examples of when it actually may not be so simple. Like, for example, there was this interesting case some years ago in Los Angeles, where it became known that the city was hiring illegal immigrants to build roads. And so the mayor of the city was in a lot of trouble because they were paying to those illegal immigrants less money and basically hiring illegal immigrants, which is not legal. So we can stop the discussion right there. I'm all for legality. I came into this country legally. I pay my taxes. I abide by the laws. I never even had a parking ticket. Actually, I did have one at the airport, $12 earlier this year. So that's the only law that I broke. So I parked without paying my. But otherwise, I'm a very law-abiding citizen. So I don't like that some people work or come to the country legally. So no doubt about that. But when confronted about that, the mayor of LA said, "Well, wait a second. Do you want roads or not? My budget is extremely limited. And the only way we can finish this highway is if I hire illegal immigrants for nearly no pay, because otherwise there will be no road." And so he says, for me, it was the choice between hiring legals or legal workers or workers legally, but not having enough money to finish the road versus hiring the illegal immigrants and finishing the road. So what do you want me to do? And so, again, I believe that the discussion should end at the point legal, illegal. So that's, there is really nothing to discuss. But it did spark an interesting discussion. So, I mean, well, turns out those illegal immigrants often are willing to work for less, which actually benefits the employers, the consumers. So that it lowers the price, the budget for the project. And so, in a way, it does provide economic benefit. So I'll let you decide where we draw the line. But as I said, it's not so sometimes simple in, once you get into this. And another interesting thing here, so in the United States, some years ago, we had the swine flu pandemic that presumably came from Mexico. And some politicians used the opportunity to curb the number of visas, so-called temporary agricultural worker visas provided to people from Mexico. And so some people were cheering and saying, hey, that's great, let's limit that immigration from Mexico. But then the farmers actually went on strike. And so there was this big parade of, farmers driving tractors through the streets of Washington, D.C. They were saying, are you crazy? So I spent the whole year growing my crop, and now I need to harvest it. And I have only a few days when I harvest my whatever fruits or grains, because otherwise it will just simply, fall to the ground and rot. And so if you don't give the visas to those temporary workers, I mean, are you going to help me pick up my fruits? I don't have enough, hands to do it. And so I depend on it. So if you don't issue those visas this year, a lot of crop will basically rot. And with that, the prices will go up. I mean, who's benefiting here? And so it was interesting to see how, depending on which group you talk to, that the conclusions are very different. So some people like, yes, let's have fewer immigrants, but others, wait a second, what is it going to do to the price of food? Or what is it going to do to the income of farmers who spend the whole half a year growing the crops? So not so easy at all. Anyway, one more, and then I'll stop. So in the European Union, so there was this interesting campaign called the Polish Plumber campaign, became very popular story after the French official, one of the ministers in France, admitted that he hired a Polish plumber to fix his broken toilet or something at home. And so everybody said, oh, that's unpatriotic to hire Polish for less money, Polish plumbers for less money than to hire French plumbers. And the guy said something like, well, the quality is good and the price was good. Why can I not? But anyway, the discussion was, well, all these Poles at that time coming to France, is it good or bad? And so again, some locals like plumbers said, oh, that's bad because they take our job. But then interestingly enough, the employers were of the opposite opinion. They say, well, for construction, we need workers. And so it's our income, it's our profits. And so if I can hire a Polish plumber for less, I save money. And I'm French too. I am, a business owner. And so who said that my economic well-being is less important than the economic well-being of a French, economic well-being of a French entrepreneur is less important than economic well-being of a French plumber. And so there was a very interesting discussion going on there. Lastly, in Canada, in the United States, so there was a spike in birth rate following the World War II. So we had the generation of so-called baby boomers born in the 50s, 60s. And so many of them are retiring now. And so currently we have about 4 people working for each person retired. But when all baby boomers are out of the labor force, there will be more retired people. And so that number can drop closer to 2 to 1. And so some believe that maybe the way to smooth that transition is to invite some more immigrants into the country. And Canada already actually increased the immigrant quota specifically to deal with this change, because otherwise we will have too few people working and too many people retired. So the quality of life for the retirees will drop, or the working people will need to be taxed more. But then again, is that a solution? Well, it's too late to start making new babies to smooth that transition. So the beauty of immigration is that you can issue more of immigrant visas, and more of those people will arrive and start working on day one, so to speak. But at the same time, so that is an issue that needs a discussion and a solution. Okay, I'll stop here, and we are pretty much out of time, but I wonder if there are any questions that I did not answer.
So I think I'll just take you to this question which we have, wherein a student is asking that what is something that immigrants can do to resolve the difference or issue of opinion with the locals to coexist?
I don't think it's possible. Like, I spent foolishly part of my life trying to, I guess, information, education, statistics. And again, very importantly, I'm not saying that immigration is good, nor am I saying immigration is bad. I'm saying it's nuanced. I showed you when immigration can be bad, when immigration can be good. So I think the solution is to have this more sophisticated, nuanced view and understanding. But at the same time, I gave up on trying to, communicate this message to people, maybe my students who are younger and more open-minded, but at least in the United States, the issue is so polarized, so politicized, that I noticed, you cannot break through that wall. So some people are, against immigration no matter what, and some people are for immigration no matter what. And unfortunately, if you try to sort of get into the middle of that discussion, you'll be hated by both sides. So I try to do these discussions only in academic settings, only assuming that the academic sort of audiences are more welcoming and open to new ideas and thoughts.
That is interesting, actually, something that the people should know. And there's another question that talks about the reduced cost of products and services, as well as they are doing the same work at a lower price, thus saving consumer a few bucks. So what is
That's true. That can create additional savings, additional spending power, and additional demand for other products. Though again, you need to analyze it depending on the context, on the specific immigrant, on the specific country, because, like, for example, my salary is by no means less than, so if anything, I cost, sort of more. But then I can imagine that there are people who might be willing for less, especially if they're illegally in the country or just arrived. And you're absolutely right. So those savings leave more money in your pocket that you can spend on an additional short or haircut or repair for your house. And that obviously will create demand for barbers or plumbers or whatever else. And so that can create more jobs. Anyway, Yukta, I think we're out of time, and another session needs to start in a different room. So thank you so much. I truly appreciate your attention and good questions. And we'll continue in the future. I have another lecture on job outsourcing that, again, is a very misunderstood issue. So we'll cover it in a couple of weeks.
Thank you so much, Professor, for being with us. It was a great lecture, and thank you so much, everyone, for joining in for today.
Thank you. Bye-bye.